Pastor Jack here. Welcome to another In Conversation. Today, I had the pleasure of sitting down over Zoom and talking with a real dear friend of mine, a pastor buddy by the name of Jordan Taylor. To give a little background about Jordan and I, he was actually the director of the Bible College campus that I graduated from in Seattle back in 2009. And through some just circumstances that could only be orchestrated by God, him and I actually served together at a church plant in Seattle, Washington, in the Wallingford neighborhood. And him and I served together for, I think, around 3 or 4 years at that church plant as co-pastors. And then after I left in 2014, Jordan continued on as a senior pastor there at Calvary Wallingford up until, I believe, about 2019, when the Lord called him down to come on and take on the executive pastor position at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, in Costa Mesa, California. And since that time, Jordan has gone through a lot of different ups and downs dealing with managing such a large church as Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, as well as having to help navigate through the difficult waters that were COVID-19 all through 2020. And so, guys, the topic of our conversation today was the call to ministry, the ups, the downs, the sideways, the difficulties, the joys, the pleasure, and the faithfulness of God through it all. And so I hope that you enjoy the conversation that Jordan and I have, and that it is a blessing to you. All right, guys. So today I am so excited. I got my friend and ex-pastor buddy, co-pastor on Zoom with me, Pastor Jordan Taylor. And so, Jordan, why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about yourself, your family, your background, what you got going on these days, and then we're going to get into the topic of calling into ministry. So, Jordan, go ahead, share a little bit about yourself.
Cool. Thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me on. I'm honored to be on. Jack mentioned that we co-pastored together, and we did that for some great years in the city of Seattle. Those are some formative years for both of us, really. But going back in my history, I'm a PK and had no desire to be a pastor. Was called to ministry in my early 20s, and have now been married 13 years to my wife, Michelle. We have 3 girls. We were at a church where I was pastoring for the last decade in the city of Seattle. And then recently I just moved down to Southern California to pastor here at a church as the executive pastor. So a little bit of a different calling, if you will, or vocation. And so been doing that for the last 2 years, basically all of COVID, which is a whole nother thing. But my education, I went to Calvary Chapel Bible College in York, England. And then I went on to Fuller Theological Seminary. They had a campus in Seattle, but I went to the Pasadena campus as well, completed my Master's of Divinity there, and am all around a typical Calvary pastor who has collected many different experiences, apprenticeships, if you will, over the years, where you're kind of just thrown into things, and yeah, you get the experience. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah. Well, and Jordan, one of the reasons why I'm so excited for us to be able to have this talk is because, of course, I know quite a bit about your story, having us pastored together and you being one of my college teachers as well there for a while. And by the way, Jordan, I just got to point out the fact you never really did answer my question from class that one day.
Are you going to bring up the Nephilim?
I'm just saying, man, you never fully answered the question. I'll let people wonder what that question was exactly. But so Jordan, you obviously too kind of got a different situation about you compared to most of us, when we were when it involves kind of an upbringing in the ministry, because of course your dad, Wayne Taylor, founded Calvary Fellowship. But were you alive yet, or were you just born, or not quite yet?
2 years before I was born. So first Calvary Chapel. Calvary Chapel is a recent denomination from the 1960s, founded by Chuck Smith, and my dad, Wayne Taylor, founded the first Calvary Chapel in the Northwest in Seattle.
Yeah.
1979.
1979. And what a lot of people don't know too is, of course, for those who don't know you and your dad, for those who do know your dad, they're going to already know these things. But of course, that church in particular planted 60 or some odd Calvary chapels around the world.
Yeah, so many different, especially in the Northwest, but then the first Calvary Chapel sort of church plant focus in Western Europe. And then in Russia, when the Iron Curtain fell, I mean, almost immediately, certain Calvary Chapel pastors were there planting churches. So many churches in Russia as well.
Yeah. And so, Jordan, so you've grown up in the church your entire life. I mean, your dad is one of the leading and honestly, probably one of the most respected leaders in Calvary Chapel. And so you kind of grew up in that environment of constantly being around church, but not just going to church. I mean, being extremely active in getting the gospel out to the world. What was that like for you growing up as a kid? And what kind of impact did that have on you in you coming to know the Lord, kind of hindrances of you coming to know the Lord? What would you say about that?
Yeah, I'd say all around it was a good experience. My parents were great parents, raised me well in the church. But of course, being privy to a lot of the behind the scenes things in churches, you see a lot of gnarly stuff. And there were a lot of difficulties in looking at, different issues over the years. And I in particular would say that I didn't necessarily feel drawn to the ministry myself. I liked going to church. I had great friends at church. We should also acknowledge that I had one of the best youth pastors of all time. Like, there's a lot of great things about it, but I didn't feel particularly drawn to ministry or to the church itself. In contrary to my siblings, I never did any, behind the scenes or upfront ministry before being called into ministry itself. So it wasn't like I was a typical, pastor's kid, leading music or reading scripture or doing some kind of minor leading roles. I really was just an attendee for all those years. And so it wasn't until the grace of God really got a hold of my heart that the calling to ministry came. And I would say that there was a bit of a hindrance being really familiar with the message of the gospel, but not hearing what the gospel was. And so I still remember coming, downstairs in my room where I grew up in North Seattle, and asking my dad, Dad, why didn't you ever tell me about grace growing up? And he looks at me with just this awestruck look. He's like, what in the world do you think I've been telling you all these years? And it was really just a blindness to the gospel that the Lord divinely and sovereignly opened my eyes to see. You could say perhaps that there was a bit of a familiarity, too familiar with the gospel that I didn't see it. But only God and his sovereignty really knows that.
Yeah, and what kind of stages were there that led you to that place of having your eyes open to grace? Because I know this wasn't a one-time experience for you. Just in the talks we've had in years past, you've shared the Lord definitely did it in specific stages where He really kind of got a hold of you and woke you up. What were some of those specific things that God used?
Yeah, I could. It's hard to compartmentalize these things because of course it's a human life and it's very complex and nuanced. But to summarize some of these things, between 18 and 20, where you had this mix of very public rebellion in my own life, and then also very public grief and shame and attempted, or you could say actual repentance in my life. There were multiple times where we would have calls for repentance. I would be one of those who would respond to those calls, but for whatever reason, the gospel wasn't, anchoring into my heart, but there was a tenderness to that. And then at age 20, where I literally, left my comfort and security. I was enrolled at the University of Washington, was general manager at a movie theater, and relatively successful, I suppose, for a young person. That I left all of that and went to Bible college in York, England. That the gospel, got a hold of me, and so that would probably be the first moment of you know what? Actually, now that I'm saying it, I should even go back further and say when I was young, I remember being 6 years old and receiving Jesus in my heart with my dad while we were actually after a fishing trip. We were cleaning out fish. So I remember that, but there wasn't a long lasting fruit out of that. You could say in my 20s there's rebellion. I mean, how do you categorize these things. Like, we have these theological systems that we put them in, but really it was a mixture of the theological systems when you're looking at my actual life. But so out of my 20s came the calling to ministry, but then, like I'll say later, I'm sure in this podcast, it wasn't until I was probably 2 years into the church plant with you. So that'd be like 2013. So this would be like, a decade later. So in my 30s, where I actually really knew God had called me to pastoral ministry. So, if you want to kind of summarize those three major phases of, early childhood trust, and then, firmness of the gospel of grace in my heart, and then ultimately the clear calling, like, I know what I'm going to be doing for the Lord in my 30s. Those would be some of the stages I could give.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so important too, because I think, unfortunately, a lot of Christians, they can get the wrong idea, especially when they look at guys like you and me who are in ministry, whether you're a small town country pastor like me, or a guy like you who's, one of the lead pastors, at a very large influential church in Southern California. Is, I think sometimes people think, well, oh, you guys, you must have just felt like that hard call from the very beginning, from childhood. And in some degree, I can say yes, but in reality, though, it never works out the way we would expect it to. It always has ups and downs, and our own walks with the Lord often gets in the middle of it and complicates quite a bit of it as well.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you've shared with your audience that of late, the Lord has brought out new life in you and your ministry. And I would say that's the same for me. It's just at different phases or stages of those things, that as a pastor serving the Lord, if you're not going through that death into resurrection personally and professionally, what I call vocational faithfulness, like, you aren't going to see I don't want to say fruit, because I don't want to attribute it to success so much, but you're not going to be proud, I suppose, of the work God is doing. You will be unstable, but the truth of the matter is that instability is part of the death too. So you're going through that time of death with the Lord, but knowing that every death in Jesus always results in resurrection. There's never a death that doesn't. And that was something that took me a long time to learn. There was a lot of instability in my early years. And even now, being here, it's been different and an adjustment, but that little d death going into Christ's resurrection, like Paul says in Galatians chapter 2, has been such an important rhythm to my life, something that I've learned over time.
Amen. And I think, Jordan, it was about a year or so before, I left Wallingford, with you there in Seattle. I remember the Lord had really impressed something on my heart that I'd never considered before, that I think is really going to kind of flesh itself out in our conversation here. And it was when I was listening to a sermon by D.A. Carson, and he was talking about his life, and he was talking about his life and ministry, from the Lord calling him into ministry when he was in his 20s, I think getting his master's degree in chemistry or something like that, and how he went from the time of being a church planter, being a pastor, teaching at seminary, then till up in his 60s starting the Gospel Coalition. And I remember when I sat back and considered all the stages of this faithful man of God, it really made me recognize how God's call to ministry comes in seasons and stages, and where you start and where you end can look incredibly radically different. And that was a real challenge for me to kind of recognize, one, there were some things I needed to get going and starting in my own life, to kind of prepare myself for some of these end ministry goals I have. But at the same time, it gave me a lot of peace and comfort to recognize calling to ministry is not an end in itself. It's a continual, ongoing, changing process that reveals itself out and clarifies itself more and more over time. And it's ultimately in the sovereign hand of God. And so for you, Jordan, what would you say was the first specific call to ministry you felt on your life? What was the first thing that you felt the Lord said, all right, Jordan, you need to do this in service to me?
Yeah, I'd say, there's several things that I could probably say there, and I won't go through a whole chronology, but, I'll say center on the time you and I spent together, in those early
Yeah.
years. I remember, one of the differences between you and I was, and probably still is you love to preach. And for me, it's a little bit of more of a task
Yeah.
to prepare and to, really, I think more the writing of the sermon is really difficult for me. But in those early years, I remember, we were co-pastoring together. We were trying to figure out what your rhythm was and what my rhythm was. But as a young church planner, I felt that pressure somewhat, but then also responsibility to be the regular voice, right? To be the regular
Hmm.
preacher, and that really forced like one of the first realizations that I had. And I was going on a walk up 46th Street, right by actually a good friend of ours, Rock and Beverly Andrews' house. And I was praying through these things, just thinking, honestly, like why am I not more like Jack, who loves to preach? But I'm called to this role of preaching. Lord, I feel like you want me to be the regular preacher, and I'm just thinking through, the gifts of the Spirit and different stuff, and why isn't my top one, preaching here? And the Lord just sort of gave me an understanding for myself, and that was that, Jordan, you have several gifts, more than one gift, and those gifts actually interrelate with one another. So yes, you're a preacher, but it interacts with other gifts that I've given you. And
Hmm.
yes, Jack's a preacher, but that interacts with other gifts I've given him. And so what you're actually doing here is actually criticizing who I've made you to be.
Hmm.
You need to understand that the giftings, and I would say the multi-dimensional, the multi faceted giftings that I've given you, you have to let those things come out. And so for me, administration, as an executive pastor, surprise, is one of those things that actually played a role in my preaching. And you and I both know, we knew we only had one service. We invented a time to give other people a shot to preach, and that was something that was born out of my heart to administrate the raising up of the next generation, something that both of us believe in.
Hmm.
But we didn't have a midweek service or another service to give a person a shot to preach, so we created that. And those are little examples of that realization that, hey, God calls the person. He's familiar with the person, and even more than that, he's familiar with the circumstances that the person is in. And often calling is related to what's in the future or what's next, and that can give room or give way to what you wish could be or what you wish was. Instead of coaching the team you have, so to speak, you just are constantly wishing you're kind of coming into your calling. But calling is actually for the person in the moment. You are
Hmm.
called to today with the gifts God has for you today. If you're faithful today, God will guide you tomorrow. And that's a realization that I realized, in those early years of those tough lessons of doing 50 out of 52 Sundays, 48 out of 52 Sundays, before I finally realized, like, okay, some of this pressure is just me. Like, I got to let go of this stuff. But those were lessons that the Lord had to bring me through.
Hmm. And so, as I'm kind of hearing some of your, you sharing these stories about teaching, because of course now you're not a lead pastor, so you're not doing the regularly teaching like you were, and you're really kind of pressing into some of your stronger gifts. How important though is it, and was it for you at that time though, to push into an area that was a weakness for you, and because I think unfortunately we get this wrong idea that calling means we're always going to use our primary gifts. I mean, because like during that time, it was an interesting dynamic you and I had. Because here you got a guy like me who's zealous. It's like, I hate being in the crowds. I hate shaking people's hands afterwards. Like, that is a struggle for me, which praise God, he's got me better at. You put me behind a pulpit, man, I feel safe up there. I feel comfortable up there, and it was funny because during our time, I'm in the background the majority of the time, and you, who would rather be in the background, was shoved to the front. Why is it important, for us to submit to God, to press into the areas where we feel weaker and less comfortable for the long term?
Oh man, there's so many reasons. We could talk about personal maturity. I think that would be one.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the personal maturity as it relates to the fruit of the Spirit, as we have in Galatians 5. I don't think that's a comprehensive list of virtues there. I think that there's a longer list, but I do think that the Holy Spirit is trying to produce some kind of fruit in each of our lives at each moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think as it relates to personal maturity, that's a huge one. A big thing on calling, another one is like, how does calling relate to the needs or the opportunities around you? What happens if your calling is to X, but the needs or the opportunities are in Y? And, that's again where this multi-faceted gifting can come into play that, Paul talks about. You have different kinds of gifts, different kinds of ministries, and then different kinds of methods in 1 Corinthians 12 there. And just this whole idea that, hey, there might be a need in your church. You got to respond to that need. That's not a question. That's part of your calling. You got to respond to that need. You got to do that need for the time that it's needed, but you should do it with the multifaceted gifts that you have. It'll be a different than, the way this person does it or the way that person does it, or, it'll be in a different area maybe than perhaps you need, but you got to respond to that because God, again, he calls the person at a place, and our responsibility is to be vocationally faithful to that. Too much comparison, otherwise, if you give into the lie that, calling has to be like, if you imagine, like in my town, there were some great preachers in my town. If you grew up just comparing yourself to those preachers, like, you'd be condemned. And so much of calling, it feels like, is about comparison to other people. But what the Lord does by giving you opportunities or needs that may or may not correspond to your calling is to help you not compare yourself, but to help you, move forward in confidence of what the Lord has called you to. It's not about pleasing men or women. It's about responding to what the Lord has. So, I could probably go on and on. I think this could be an in-depth conversation to deal with different insecurities and questions. But, those are some of the things that I've crossed.
Yeah, and that reminds me of, a lesson the Lord really laid on my heart a few years ago, actually. And it's just what you're touching on there about the fact that, truth be told, the need in the moment trumps your personal feeling of calling. And too many Christians will bypass a need within the church or in some sort of service because they say, well, I don't feel called to it. But the fact of the matter is, God doesn't hold us responsible to fulfill some sort of personal call that we feel like we have in our hearts. If that's instilled from God, he's going to work that out, as we're going to talk about. He's going to bring about those details, but he does hold us accountable to serve in the place where the needs actually are. And that's where I think a lot of Christians need to, in some ways, demystify this whole idea of calling. Because what is our ultimate calling? It's to be faithful to God and what he has called us to do and the situations he's laid before us. That is the most important place of calling.
Yeah. And, I would maybe just add a little bit of nuance to just simply say that, if you, for example, feel there's a need in children's ministry and you realize, okay, I got to step into that, but I don't necessarily feel called to that. What I would say is you should respond to that need, but you should respond in the giftings that God has given you in those things. And it could be that your giftings bring a totally different spin on children's ministry. And it could be that your giftings actually completely reimagine children's ministry. Or it could even be, and I'll throw this out there, that your giftings will actually close children's ministry for righteous and good reasons. Like, there actually is a many different giftings. And I think a lot of times we operate as calling is in vocational calling is in church ministry is we have to compare it to the best children's ministry. Well, if I'm called or if I'm responding to a need in children's ministry, I'm just going to do it the way, the best people do it. And while I think it's important to learn best practices, you have to utilize your giftings. Like Andy Crouch says in his book, Culture Making, where is God's graciousness bringing about fruit naturally? Those are the giftings that you should be leaning into. And so, yes, I agree. You're responsible to respond to the need, but don't think you need to respond to it like somebody else does. You should respond to it as the Lord leads you. And I should point out one more nuance. Sometimes the Lord leads you through disappointment or discontent.
Mm-hmm.
That you're actually discontent with a particular situation. That could be the Lord. He could be stirring up what I call holy discontent, so that he's leading you to reimagine this ministry or calling or whatever to this more fruitful, more healthy, or whatever it may be, place, so that he could do a greater work.
Jordan, I appreciate you so much, because honestly, this, what you just touched on right there reminded me so much of our years of doing ministry together and kind of our differences, because I'm such a responsibility driven person. Hey, there's a need, do it. And your administrative side and pastoral side has always encouraged me, because you can always bring in that perfect nuance to help bring out what is inside of people, of what the Lord has put in them. So I appreciate that so much, brother. Okay, so let's kind of move into this whole, the Lord moving and directing you in your life. One thing we haven't even touched on, the fact is you took on the Bible college in Seattle, and you really created that into a booming, fruitful thing. I'm a product of that fruit and your labors that you poured into there at Bible college. And then you came on to Wallingford when I was in a place of kind of being a campus overseer. And then you stepped in to really fill the gap that was so needed there at that time. And then, around the same time, you told me about the same time that the Lord was calling me and telling me after 6 years, okay, it's time to come down to Missouri. Around that same time, you said the Lord started really showing you what your calling was, and that has kind of directed you to the place you're at now. What was that process that you were going through, that led you from Seattle now to Southern California?
Oh man, there's a lot of twists and turns along the way, but similar to our conversation that we've been having, in those years that we worked together, the Lord was really affirming my role as a pastor. So I'm a pastor, and there was a season even when we were working together, and where I was wondering, like, okay, am I forever a pastor? Is this what I'm going to do as a paid profession, or asking myself all of those different kinds of questions. But in those years together, during that time, the Lord really firmed it up. Hey, if I'm paid or unpaid, if I have a prominent role or just am behind the scenes, I'm going to pastor people. That's what I do. I'm a shepherd.
Mm-hmm.
And that is manifested in different places and different times, but that's what I do. And so that was cemented in me in those years. Now, fast forward the years we weren't together, you were in Missouri and I was continuing in Seattle. And the Lord, is continuing to do this work. And even though I am a shepherd leading God's sheep, it begins to emerge that, the Lord has different things for me. And, it's always an interesting sign when you have people in your own church telling you, hey, I think the Lord has called you to something else besides this church. And, they're not saying that like, hey, get out of here, we're ready for the next person. But, they, in community of God's people together, sharing wise words with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm praying about these things, and, my wife and I are praying through different things. And, we come to this place where, all right, Lord, what do you want to do? We're open. And my logic is like, I don't, really operate in the realm of the hypothetical. So I'm not going to be, putting my resume out or putting out feelers. That's not me. I'm not down on, LinkedIn or anything like that. I'm just saying that, that's not where I was at that moment. And I said essentially to my wife and to the Lord, hey, if you want me to move, you have to present the opportunity. So lo and behold, several opportunities were presented at the same time. And then this opportunity to be the executive pastor at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, from Brian Broderson, the pastor here with me, was presented. And I remember, thinking about this, letting this monkey wrench kind of simmer in my mind. My wife and I had chosen a day to pray and fast together. And so, I'm praying and fasting. And on that day, we meet for a prayer meeting in North Seattle, and I'm listening to the different pastors share and listening to the different prayers. And I just am impressed by the Lord and by my own conscience. Like, I don't necessarily relate to some of the things that they're sharing. Like, am I a bad pastor because of this? Like, I'm not connecting with these things. Is that bad? And the Lord again sort of just affirmed, like, no, I've called you lean into your gifts and go. And so the next day I resigned from the church that I was pastoring, Calvary Wallingford. And then 2 months later, we had a pastor who was going to take my place, who was doing a great job with the church there. So in this whole thing, the Lord, again, was leading me to a place of faithfulness to him. But my concern was faithfulness to his people. He had to provide that. And he provided that by leading me. And so I don't know if I'm totally answering your question, but to go from, regularly teaching every, almost every Sunday, to be in a place where I preach probably, between 4 and 6 times a year, that transition was through the affirmation of God, through the leading of God, through the affirmation of God's people, and through a time of prayer and reflection to get to this place. And now being here through COVID, I mean, this is a large organization, over 700 staff when I came on in 2019, and it's been a time where my role has been utilized by the Lord, and I'm grateful for his mercy to be with me in that, because COVID has presented a lot of need to administrate and lead in those key areas.
And so, so you've made this big transition then, from Seattle, honestly, which was a place of comfort as well for you, because I mean, it was family, everybody was right there. I mean, even our church, that you and I, pulled together in Wallingford, was filled with people that you had known, many of them, much of your life. And now suddenly you're down in Southern California. And I remember when you called me up, of course, you were kind of nervous about it and all that kind of stuff, when you first told me about it. And I was a little jealous because I was like, oh, come on, Lord, what about me? But so you get transitioned down there, and then suddenly you get hit with one of the worst years, probably in our nation's history. Let's just pretty much put it kind of that way, as far as the shutdowns, all that kind of stuff. I mean, doing church was hard, this last year. And I know, it's been exceptionally difficult for where you're at in Southern California. As the other night when you and I were talking on the phone, I mean, for us, pretty much the last year we've been going on life as normal, with the occasional fight over whether we have to wear masks. I mean, that's my neck of the woods. But I know for you guys, I mean, you've had to live in this constant pressure of COVID and government regulations. And I'm sure you guys have had a lot of disagreements with congregants and pastors. How should things be done? Should we be acting like this church, that church, everything? So in all of this, what has the Lord shown you about faithfulness to calling, not meaning it's the easier road?
Oh man. And if I hadn't learned those lessons of, going into death and coming out of death in resurrection with Christ, that sort of, what they call the cruciform life, I think it would have been much more difficult, disappointment, unexpected circumstances, pain, those things can be perceived as the wrong path. And, sometimes, honestly, they are, if they're the result of, poor choices, sin, consequences of sin, different things like that. But sometimes they're not. It's just life. And honestly, sometimes they can be the result of obedience to the Lord. You and I actually were just talking the other night, that time you were talking about the gift of prophecy and Paul receiving that prophecy that he's going to be bound when he goes to Jerusalem. And the interpretation is, don't go. But Paul's like, the prophecy is correct. The interpretation is suspect here. I need to go because I need to be faithful to the Lord, because just like Jesus set his mind to go towards Jerusalem in his crucifixion, Paul set his mind to go to Jerusalem knowing he was going to be arrested. And so coming through COVID, we, from the very beginning, not without difficulty, of course, and of course the government in California being more restrictive than most, played an interesting role, but we took the approach of trying to reflect on who are we, what are we called to, how can we refine our vision as we move forward into what the Lord has for us next. And so we really took this as an opportunity. And it's not a silver lining to COVID. This is a tragedy. Many people were affected negatively. Many people lost their lives. And there has been, even for churches, there's been a lot of churches who have closed, a lot of pastors who are going through very deep, dark seasons of their life. However, out of that, I believe the Lord can bring resurrection life. And so we leaned into that. Andy Crouch talked about how, this isn't going to be a snowstorm. This isn't going to be a blizzard necessarily, where it's lasting for weeks on end. He talked about it from the beginning as a mini ice age, that we're coming into years of this. And so we adopted that posture that this is going to be years of COVID. And thankfully, it seems like as a nation, we're headed in a different direction there. But taking that posture sort of made us look at, all right, Lord, what are we doing? There were 88 ministries here when I started. And honestly, that was from 60 years of doing, church work. We just kind of collected a bunch of stuff. And, some of those things are core. So, hey, as we wait on the Lord and are led by the Lord, we're reinvesting, reimagining, and strategizing how the Lord wants to continue to use these core ministries. Some of them were not, and they needed to be sunset or honorably put to sleep. And so we did that. We did a lot of those things, hard conversations. But ultimately, our pastor, Brian, he said this multiple times and throughout the pandemic, the Lord is the one who is overseeing all of this, and he was in Philippians at the time. And he talked about Paul being imprisoned as a prisoner of Christ. He's like, but he said, Christ didn't imprison Paul. The Roman emperor imprisoned Paul. But Paul's idea is that this is under the Lord and under his guidance, and we need to see it as that. And so for us, we've seen the pandemic as that, and really tried to work hard to, the kind of popular word is pivot. We have done a bit of that. Obviously, our online digital has been a big part of that. That's a thing, but we already had all of that before this. But I'd say more than that, the cultural change, the cultural, honoring the past of 60 years of different ministries being started and having to say, thank you, Lord, for what you've done. Thank you for these servants, but we're going to move in a different direction. We've had to do a lot of that, and doing that is not easy. It's not something I take lightly. These are people, these are their livelihoods in some cases. This is their calling in other cases. But again, trusting that the Lord gives and calls the person in the moment to be his faithful servant. We could entrust them to the Lord to lead them into the next moment.
Amen. And Jordan, I know through all of this, a lot of the hard decisions you guys have had to make, a lot of this pivoting that you've done. I think a lot of people could listen in on this, and hear, without knowing the specifics of it, they could probably kind of think it's like, oh, well, okay, but how big a deals were these, especially for those people who don't understand church ministry. I mean, even for us, some of the changes we had to make in our small little church, like stressed me out to the core. Trying to figure out how to do certain things, because you guys already had a digital platform in place. Yeah, we just got a website a couple of years ago. We're talking about completely different worlds here, but I know for you had to make some huge decisions, and, you had to be the kind of the axe man at times with certain things, and it made things difficult for other people. But and I think what a lot of people sometimes forget about these people who have to be the decision makers, or they have to be the ones who are executing decisions, is that takes a toll on you as a person as well. And I know that this year has been extremely difficult on you as you've had to make so many of these decisions. I remember, I think it was a few months ago when Marietta, the Bible college campus, got put up for sale, and I was just like scrolling through Facebook, and I don't remember if it was Christianity Today or wherever, but I ran across this article about the Bible college that I went to getting put up for sale. And I was like, oh my goodness, so I clicked on that. And as I'm scrolling through, I look at the bottom and it's signed Jordan Taylor. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you had to make that decision. And I just think about all of that, but I also remember something that was so core about you that you imparted to me all the way back when I was in Bible college was the importance of rest. When you're pouring yourself out into the Lord and when you're serving the Lord, you have to be able to find a rhythm. You have to be able to find rest. And I've often seen you model that in our times together. I saw you model that with me, where there were times when I'd be walking through Calvary Fellowship and you would look at me and say, Jack, go home. You're tired. Get out of here. Go home. Take some rest. How have you learned, to find rest in the midst of this? Because one thing I know is when you're in the midst of the war, you can't always necessarily lay down and take a nap. but at the same time, we can only do so much. So how have you learned through the difficulties, to be able to get a rhythm of life so that you could get enough rest to be able to get back up and to get back in and to keep on doing the work without burning out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Before I answer that, I should comment on the listing, since you mentioned it, of
Okay.
the Marietta Hot Springs. That was a decision that was made collectively, and with every effort to be
Mm-hmm.
a vision informed decision, a scripture informed decision, what is the Lord doing in the future decision. And it's really hard in COVID, where finances are different, let's put it that way, for
Yeah.
everybody,
To put
to
it
not
lightly.
be reactionary, to, yeah, to not, just, get swept up in the desperation. That was not ever anything from my perspective that we
Mm-hmm.
were swept up in. And it was something that the Lord, in his graciousness, provided us the footing and the stability to make a vision informed decision to continue the college, hopefully for, however the long the Lord allows, decades and decades into the future, but to realize that, 1,000-person campus with a 200-person college is probably not the current sustainable model. We should think through this. And
Mm-hmm.
so those are things that, we're trying to pray through to set up our core strategy, which is resourcing, discipling, equipping the next generation of college students, the called and gifted for the Lord and his people, into whatever the Lord has for them, so that other Jacks and Elaine's and, Jordan's, myself, and others can come through that and move on into that. But
Mm-hmm.
those are hard decisions,
Yeah.
and it's hard to nuance that, especially as you see comments online and different things like that. It's hard. It's very difficult to nuance that. But I think that what I just said has been one of the things that I've tried to repeat whenever I can, just simply to give a little bit of color to the commentary, to say, no, the Lord has been faithful to lead us up until this point, and we are praying and waiting on the Holy Spirit for his leading at every twist and turn. Now, as far as how to rest in that, I think that what I just said is the first foundation.
Mm-hmm.
If you know that the Lord is leading and he is the one who is the, ultimately who has the final say, it is a whole lot easier to rest. Because in one sense, we're not just talking about taking a day off, though that's important, and we're not talking about taking a vacation, though that's important. That I'll comment on that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're talking about is the quality of those things. That in your day off, in your vacation, you are actually resting, and that you are actually being rejuvenated and hearing from the Lord, even as you maybe are just existing, enjoying your home, or whatever vacation the Lord gives you. It is important. And so for me, the ability to say no plays a huge role in that.
Mm-hmm.
I do not have FOMO. I don't have fear of missing out. So that's an advantage that I
Yeah.
have. That I know, because there's so many opportunities, and we see the opportunities from friends on social media and other areas. We want to constantly be doing things, constantly, in tune with things, but just saying no, I'm not going to go to this event. No, you got it. Hey, I don't need to be there. I'm going to go home. I'm not going to join in this thing, even though actually I kind of want to, but I have also an obligation to minister to my family and to be rested in order to do that. So having those priorities straight are a huge part of that. I'm a huge proponent in 24-hour Sabbath. So, very much I am disengaged for at least one 24-hour period per week, and allowing the Lord in his unlimited power to stand in the gap in my limiting of myself for that 24-hour period. And so that's something I practice. Of course, vacations. I talk to so many pastors and ministers who have literally never taken a vacation, and just this idea that it rests on their shoulders or their family's shoulders, or if they don't do it, it won't get done. You
Mm-hmm.
know what? if that's the case, then you should let it kind of not get done for a week or two. So you can go on vacation, and then so the leaders that remain can see, oh, it didn't get done. What are we going to do? They'll step into that vacuum most of the time. Of course, there's not always, but those are things to talk through. So those are practices that I have. Again, I keep quoting Andy Crouch, but his teachings on this, especially with technology, as a book out for family called TechWise Family, are really incredible. Actually, a little story on that. Like we started doing this thing as a family where we would eat dinner together around the table, which we do, 3 or 4 times a week, but we would do it once a week where we would turn off all the electricity in the house and we'd light candles, not to set the mood per se, but just this whole idea that electricity is a form of someone else's work, right? Somebody's maintaining the lines and making sure everything runs smoothly. But this whole sort of symbolic acknowledgement that no, ultimately we need to cease all of those things, and so that we could lean into them. It's not just about our taking rest, but when we go to the grocery store, we're making sure other people can't take rest. And so, just that interrelated society, and especially the community, as a boss and as a leader, if I'm at work, guess what? A lot of my staff have to be at work. So you actually are preventing other people from resting by your lack of rest. So, there's all these components, but ultimately it begins with the Lord is the Lord of the Sabbath, like Jesus says. He set up the Sabbath for humans because he knew that we're not God. And it is intended, it's set up before the fall. So it is intended to endure as a testament, as a placeholder of worship for the omnipotent, supreme, unlimited God. And so leaning into that hasn't been a problem. And I would say also my wife has really forced me to have good boundaries. I got to there.
I think our wives are sometimes our best barometers to be able to tell us when we're overdoing it, overstretching, totally. And it's time to sit down and stop.
My answer to that question guaranteed is different if Michelle was here.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's good, man. Well, okay, Jordan, we're coming up on an hour here, and I don't want to, take up too much of your time because I know you got a lot that you got to be doing, but I do want to just kind of cover a couple more questions though. Kind of the first one though, with all the difficulties, that a faithful call to ministry brings, because it brings a lot of difficulties with it. And I think that's something everybody has to accept. When they accept a call to ministry, whatever it might be, they're also accepting difficulty. And that has to be something we just embrace. What, though, are some of the blessings that you've experienced along the way, though, that make it worth doing? Because I know, sometimes us pastors, we can become guilty of constantly woe is meing about how difficult our jobs are, our tasks are, and everything. And it was just a few years ago, I had to finally stop and ask myself even, hey, Jack, if everything sucks so bad, then why are you doing this? And is that what God wants you to do? I mean, it's like, just be honest with yourself, and this is where, things like Thanksgiving and worship are so important. But what are some of the blessings, though, along the lines that make going through the difficult seasons worth going through and not just abandoning ship?
Yeah, I would say first thing that comes to mind is, John Stott says in his book, The Living Church, he talks about every member ministry and this whole idea that the called and the gifted for the different roles are there to equip the saints for ministry. And this thing that happens when you see a saint respond to that equipping and step into their own calling and their own gifting, I mean, there's just nothing like it, to know that the Lord is using you to equip the saints for ministry. I'd say that's one of the greatest blessings that a person can have. And it's been an immense joy for me to see different people. I mean, we could go through some of our own acquaintances that we share mutually and think, we did not see that coming. Some where the Lord is like, hey, I'm going to call this person. And we're like, you do that, Lord. We don't see that quite yet, but we're thankful for you, and that is a great joy. to participate in that in whatever small way that the Lord uses us to plant, water, or reap as the Lord gives us different moments there. I would say also, personally, a life of following Jesus is immensely satisfying. There are moments where I remember back to my, kind of previous success of having lots of things and lots of extra cash. I was very fluid with the money for an early part of my life before I was following Jesus. And that was awesome. I loved that. And yet now it's been tight. There have been seasons where, we've had to make very difficult, painful financial decisions to sacrifice in order to continue. But this whole I'm gonna use the word feeling, even though I'm not a super feelings oriented person. But this whole feeling of knowing God is, satisfying me, that I can't trade that. Since knowing Jesus, since tasting and seeing that He is good, there has been nothing that I would trade for that. And so again, experiencing that over and over. I know these are kind of maybe, I don't know, cliche to say, but those are really, truly some benefits. I could probably go down the list and say that there has been some success too that I could point to, but it would be hard for me to get away from, both seeing people raised up, equipped, and then myself personally being satisfied in the Lord. Those are some of the greatest blessings that I can't trade. And like I said, I've had a smidgen of worldly success, but they don't compare. They do not compare to the satisfaction of Jesus.
Amen. And like one thing I often tell people too, because so many people are like, I want to see God move. I want to see Him act powerfully. I want to see Him manifest His faithfulness in just incredible ways. One of the things I so often tell people is like, listen, you read in the Bibles, every time you see the Lord perform a miracle and bring great encouragement to His people, it was when the people had nowhere else to turn. And all they could do was turn upon, and look at the Lord. And that's one of those things I often look back on. If somebody had asked me, Jack, why do you keep on doing it? It's because, well, when I'm faithful to God in the hard times, when all I have to rely on is Him, that is when I see God show up in incredible ways. That's when I see the gifts of the Spirit, even the miraculous ones, just suddenly manifest themselves. I mean, that's where I actually experience the voice of the Lord. And I wish it was in the easy times, and I wish it was in the good times that my intimacy with the Lord was the closest. But the fact of the matter is, the Lord speaks most clearly in the times when I am completely destroyed. And that's one of those things that kind of keeps me going along, because that's one of the testimonies you see all throughout Scripture with God's saints. Going back to Paul, Agabus comes to him, ties him up, and says, hey, in the same way the Jews in Jerusalem are going to tie you up and hand you over to the Romans. And that's what happens. Paul's in Romans is in a prison for a couple years. And one of the verses that's always stood out to me, it says that one night Jesus appeared to him and comforted him and said, hey, in the same way as you were faithful to preach of me in Jerusalem, so you must also do in Rome. And the fact is, if you want to experience that kind of call from the Lord, that comes in a place of suffering for Jesus, when, He's brought you to that place and equipped you to that place so that He knows you're going to endure and you're not going to give up. And He's going to come alongside you in those moments and manifest Himself to you in ways that I'll just say are beyond imagination, to say the least.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I actually just preached on a Sunday a couple weeks ago, and Brian, our pastor, he graciously gave me 1 Corinthians 7 to preach. And I'm pretty sure he was snickering when he gave me that assignment. But 1 Corinthians 7 is not just about singleness and marriage. It is about remaining in the calling in which you were called. And this whole idea that God can be faithful wherever you are. And you're right. Like, often it comes through the avenue of suffering and the need for endurance or patience. But it can be anywhere. You could be wealthy and the Lord could use you. You could be impoverished and the Lord could use you. And Paul, for 1 Corinthians 7, you could be married and the Lord could use you. And you could be single and the Lord could use you. And Paul even exclaims, you could be a slave and the Lord could use you, or in the case you just mentioned, imprisoned, and the Lord can make you faithful. And this whole idea that we limit the Lord to our circumstances is a habit we have to get ourselves out of, and where we're looking with eyes of faith to the Lord in any and every circumstance. That, yes, in moments of desperation, lean into the Lord, but in moments of plenty, lean into the Lord. Those are harder habits. Like Jesus says, it's harder. It's, impossible for the rich to pass through the eye of the needle. Like, yes, or the camel, excuse me, to pass through the eye of the needle, and the rich to enter the kingdom of God. Like, yes, it's difficult, but we can be faithful in whatever area the Lord has called us to. And we really all need each other, in order to mutually support one another. That I need the person who is not in sort of this, they're a saint needing to be equipped by me, but I need them as much as they need me. And Luther talks a lot about this, that the shoemaker makes the shoes for the gospel preacher who goes from town to town to preach the gospel, right? Like we operate in this symbiosis together. And that really is an acknowledgement of God's greater power. And there is a kind of arrogance that we can think that our situation or that our circumstance is the situation or the circumstance that the Lord uses, when really he's just kind of looking around for someone to just look heavenward and say, use me, or Lord, be present, And so those are things that I'm constantly learning, as in this role. I'm often out of my depth, but now, honestly, I'm actually doing things I'm pretty comfortable with. Like I could wake up in the morning and go about doing all of my things with very little preparation in a sort of anxious sense, where I'm not worried or concerned about this or that thing. It's coming very naturally to me, but I still need to have times of dependent preparation for the Lord leading in those moments. And so even though I'm naturally being used more easily, I need to intentionally set aside times to depend on the Lord and his leading. And those are beautiful, beautiful. And it might not always be, the Lord could call me on to other things after this that are much more, difficult. It could be regular preaching again, where, it is very difficult for me to, I love studying. I love preaching the act, but writing the message, man, there's just, I overthink it, and so the Lord could call me back to that. But you know what? The Lord can he can powerfully work no matter what circumstance. And what does he want to do? Well, he wants to tell me if I will listen.
Amen. Amen. All right, Jordan. Well, hey, man, we're over an hour and I want to honor your time. Okay. So, final question then, just kind of for wrapping things up. And I mean, this is kind of a summation of everything we've talked about. If you were to go back and sit down and talk to, 25-year-old Jordan about the calling to ministry and what things were going to look like, what would just be some final encouraging words you would say to yourself, and even, in connection to the audience who might be listening in on this podcast later?
I think, I've been through difficulty. I've been through trials. I've been through testings. I don't know that I would speak to those things, but I would speak to the destructive or self-destructive reactions in those times. Oftentimes, any sort of regular habitual sin that I'm going through is a reaction to a time of stress or a time of difficulty or a time of anxiety or fear. And it could also be a time of prosperity too. So I'd speak to both, but more, I would say to my younger self to really try to cultivate the beautiful things. Like I think that there are these things that when you're going through stress and pressure and anxiety and fear, that you think you press into the core things, and that's good and fine, I suppose, but sometimes it's to the exclusion of like a good friendship, for example. That, oh, I need to study more, I need to pray more. And then, I exclude like connecting or keeping in touch with a friend, or setting aside a moment of just play with my family or with a good friend. And I would say that actually has, as more I've sustained those habits, that's actually prevented me not from going through difficulty or anxiety or having just general need for endurance, patience, and perseverance, but more that it's protected me from negative reactions in those times. And I don't think I really understood that as a young man. When you're in your 20s, you kind of just do it naturally. But then there's a period of your life where you think that you got to do all this stuff instead of like talking to a friend for an hour. And maybe you don't even talk about spiritual things. Maybe you just talk about the beauty of creation, or what God's doing through other people that may not be related to your church. Just cultivating that, enjoying God's creation and enjoying other people's creativity out of God's creation. Those are things that I've begun to realize more and more, that those are habits that I actually have to cultivate. They don't come conveniently. And I got afraid at a certain point, and it's something that I've, kind of protected myself in now. I got afraid at a certain point that I would miss a whole gap of my children's life because it wasn't spiritual, or it wasn't, I needed to work in those things. And I think there's that temptation when you're a young man to work, to provide and do that stuff, but to play, to just be, to exist, to watch Marvel movies with my 3 girls. Like those are things that the Lord uses to remind you of your finiteness, not in a bad way, but in a way that makes you more worshipful of his infiniteness. So, I don't know if that really gets at it, but that's something I've been thinking about lately.
Yeah.
Is it's that does not come at convenient times when you're under pressure. Those have to be made. The space for those has to be made.
Amen. Amen. And, Jordan, just in this conversation, there's so many more things we could talk about and so much more stuff that we could bring out of this. And honestly, Jordan, I think we should probably schedule to have this talk again in about 20 years, sure, and kind of see where we're at that point. But hey, man, I appreciate you so much coming on and just sharing, just practical life experiences, from a man who has faithfully served the Lord. As long as I've known you now, since when did we first meet? 2008, I think. You have been one of these guys who I've seen the Lord just faithfully move and use and transform and just be a huge blessing to so many people. I can say honestly right now, I would not be in the place that I am today if it wasn't for you and a lot of just the good work that you did in pouring into me. And I'm just so appreciative of that and of you and your ministry. And I'm thankful, that Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa has you there. And I'm looking forward to seeing what all God, is going to be doing through you in the future. And one thing I might even tell the audience too, that I think is important for people to recognize as well. Here, you and I, we've talked a lot about perseverance. We've talked a lot about pushing through. We've talked about resting, faithfulness, all this kind of stuff. One final word I would like to share with people is to also let them know, hey, listen, if you are serving the Lord the best you can in ministry, and things just reach the point that you recognize you can't do it anymore, that's okay. And that's one of those words that if I were to have given myself some advice, 7 years ago, that would have been an incredibly healing and helpful word for me, because that was a lesson the Lord had to teach me hard, was the importance of being able to surrender and be okay with the fact that, just say, yep, I've failed. I've botched it. And, even sometimes honestly considering maybe it's time to step away from a time is a good and acceptable thing to do during certain seasons. You see it with the saints all throughout the Bible. You see it all throughout history. Lots of times guys get so overwhelmed, they recognize they can't do it anymore, and they have to go on a prolonged season of rest. And that's the important thing to recognize. Stepping away and quitting for a time is not giving up on Jesus and walking away forever, but it's taking time to be able to get yourself reoriented, to get yourself back in line with Jesus. I had to do a 3-month sabbatical a number of years ago. And I think everybody needs to know, hey, reaching the point that in your call to ministry, you have to completely step away is okay. And God's not mad at you for that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Jack. And, thank you for those kind words. I feel actually mutually about you. I mean, these are things that we're learning together. And I just want to reiterate what you simply said, that, the Lord calls people at different seasons. And sometimes those are seasons of rest. We're implementing a sabbatical policy here. That Calvary, most Calvary pastors, Calvary Chapel pastors, they've never taken a sabbatical. They've never even heard of a sabbatical, and for good reason. Our founder, an honorable work that he did, he died almost literally in the pulpit. Those are things that we saw modeled for us that, we're having to evaluate now and progress in. And these are things that are ongoing conversations. And, just the last thing I'll say on that too is there's this term in this book I read on pastoral care where he talked about an encore career. And this whole idea that an older person is retiring and, what's next. And we've sort of been pitched this idea of retirement as, going down to Arizona or Florida and just playing golf all the time and, not really doing much or having some minimum wage job. But the point is that no, God actually, he can call you to an encore, which is a standing ovation. Like, this is what the Lord has for you. And it could be unrelated or related to your previous career. I think, really having a fully orbed understanding of the different stages of life, not so much in what we're doing, but how we're giving ourselves away to others in the power of the Lord is so key.
Amen. Amen. All right, Jordan. Well, hey, man, thank you so much for coming on. Looking forward to seeing you here in a few weeks.
All right. God bless, Jack.
Yeah. God bless you too, bro. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that conversation that me and Jordan Taylor were able to have. And I would encourage any single one of you guys who are going through just the throes of asking the questions, what is my call to ministry? Lord, what is it you're asking me to do? Or perhaps you're in the midst of ministry and you're just feeling burned out and you're just feeling tired. Here's the thing that I want to encourage you with. Remember, you're not alone in this. Every Christian who steps out to faithfully follow the Lord goes through all of these difficulties themselves. And so please, I hope that this conversation encouraged you to be patient in waiting upon the call that the Lord might have for your life, to recognize that your call will continually be changing and evolving as the years go forward, and that if it's difficult and it's hard and you're not seeing much what you would think of as fruit, that doesn't mean that you're a failure. The Lord is still using you and he is still planting seeds. And so I would encourage you, keep on pushing forward and trusting in the Lord. All right, guys. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I pray that it was a blessing for you as you were able to listen in on it. I got some more good conversations coming up in the future, so I'd encourage you to please like this video, share it with your friends, like my YouTube channel so that when more of these conversations come out, you will be notified that they are available for you to watch. And once again, guys, always, thank you so much for joining me for In Conversation. God bless you, and I hope to see you all again right here very soon. Goodbye now.